Welcome, everybody. So excited to bring this show to you. And thank you for getting situated early. Holly, hello. Oh my goodness. Oh, how are you? Kathy is in Austin, Texas. Where's everybody from? Where are we seeing people from today? Easton, Pennsylvania. Fairfax, Virginia. Awesome. Awesome. Columbia, South Carolina. And of course, you guys know I am in beautiful Boulder, Colorado, although I'm originally from New York and I moved here from California. Hey, Holly. Gosh, it's been ages. Hope you're doing well. Atlanta, Georgia, Duluth, beloved neighbor of Canada. Yes. Atlanta. Now, as you guys know, we are going to be what an incredible opportunity. Judge Brea Burgie, and she will be joining us in a bit. As you probably know, that I usually open these shows a little early so people can get situated, so they can filter in, so we can chit chat, so we can have our coffee. And someone just asked me where in New York. I am from Midtown originally, Margaret. Look at me, I'm talking like New York City is the only New York. Of course it isn't, and in fact, I did my undergrad in, Buffalo, but I'm originally from New York City. Hell's Kitchen. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Russell and Chris and Shirley, Paul and Elizabeth, and I just suddenly felt like Miss Jean on Romper Room, which is really dating myself, but, Margaret, Schenectady, awesome. Williamsville, not far from where I did my undergrad at all. And again, we are going to be being joined by ousted immigration judge Brea Burgie. And I'm just so grateful that she has agreed to come on the show and talk about what's going on because, boy, immigration has just been obviously turned upside down. It's pretty crazy. Hey, did any of you guys have a chance to see the article that I just sent out about maybe 20 minutes ago? Speaking of immigration, let me tell you, if you haven't already seen it, the Trump administration has been using immigration policy to basically get rid of people who have been working to combat disinformation on the internet platforms. And of course, the Trump administration is claiming that what they are doing is censoring because, of course, a lot of the disinformation is in the administration's favor and is lies for the administration or by the administration. So that's what that article is about. I hope you have a chance really to read the opinion because it is Judge Boasberg, and we love Judge Boasberg. He is so badass, and he just spanked the administration up one side and down the other. So, hopefully you guys will get a chance to read that. Hey, Daisy. Robin, I am really excited for this interview as well. Propaganda fella in Montreal. Woot woot, indeed. Some of you, I see several people from Canada here, and I still don't know how to say it because, um, I, ha- boy, that's really going to throw people off. So people who don't know, I have hired an incredible genealogist, Muggsy Marguerite, the Gonzo genealogist, to trace my Canadian ancestry so that I can reclaim my own Canadian citizenship. And what I don't know how to pronounce is when someone is from Quebec, because that is where my most immediate relatives came down from. So, say K I'm gonna butcher it, but anyway, eventually I'll learn how to say in French, I'm, a Quebecan. Hello, Twagirimana? Is that how you pronounce it? Quebec. Julie says to pronounce Quebec, Quebec. But when I say I am of Quebec, it's something like Québécois? I just don't know. I feel so bad trying to even say it and butchering it. But anyway, um, I need to start cursing. All right, well, here's a little known secret about me. When I was in the army, I was a truck driver, and I can indeed curse like a truck driver, but I choose not to. Québécois. Thank you, Julie. Québécois. And she even spelled it phonetically for me. So thank you so much. Okay, so it's about 5 minutes from the top of the hour, and hopefully Judge Berkey will be here soon. And of course, we always wait a few extra minutes. So, what was that? The journalist subpoenas just withdrawn. Which case was that in? Was that in they were disclosing about the aircraft, or which one, Carrie? Julie, I was wondering what you meant by your terrorists. People are saying yes. So I'm guessing they're saying it was the subpoenas for the journalists that talked about the Secret Service telling Trump to use the old Air Force One. Yep. Awesome. That is awesome. I haven't even so I've been working on this and on the article that I just sent out, so I haven't had a chance to check news. But that is awesome uh, and interesting. So we will try to field questions for Judge Berge. She only wants to talk about her own personal experience, and that is wise. That's as it should be for her to be very careful like that. So, I do I'll be monitoring the chat for questions, but please only questions very specific to her and her own situation, not to anything else that has gone on. It's, prudent of her to not talk about those sorts of things. And, Margaret, and for that same reason, there may be things even related to her experience that she can't talk about because, of course, anything that she says publicly can be used by the administration if she is, in fact, going to fight her termination. Hello from Michigan. Hi, Rose Lady. Up, and here is Judge Bergie. Hi.
Oh, how are you?
I am so well. How are you? I
Mm.
love the hanging behind you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. It's a local artist from Denver named Daniel Luna. He used to
It's beautiful.
collect scrap wood from, like, the alleys, and then he would repaint it, and I love it.
That it's beautiful. So we're gonna wait a few minutes to get officially started, at which
Mm,
point I will fawn over you and thank you for joining us. It's really great to see you, and we really appreciate you being here. And if you can just hang for a few minutes, we don't want to start early because that way, people who get here on time will have missed a little bit. But
mm.
let's see.
Just let me
It
know
took
when you're
the
ready.
judge. So I'm just hearing from the people in the chat that it was just announced that the subpoenas that the Trump administration sent to the New York Times reporters because they had the audacity to report that he had been told to use the old Air Force One. Um,
Mhm.
we're just hearing that they have been withdrawn.
Well, that's good.
And, one of the followers, Jen, says it took the judge 45 minutes to an hour to convince the government to withdraw the subpoenas. So, then the judge wanted to put on sanctions, and that worked. So more and more, we are seeing the judiciary in general just really holding the line, and that's what I always tell the people who follow or read me or watch my shows, that, the judiciary has become, as was intended, the guardrail, and they really are doing a pretty outstanding job. I just wrote up an article, about Judge Boasberg. I just learned about this decision, even though it was earlier this month, where the administration was using, and you may know about this because it's in your bailiwick, the administration was using immigration law and policy to basically go after people who were themselves combating misinformation online
Mm,
and using this, crazy policy that, so basically the administration was saying that the people going after disinformation were censoring, were guilty of censorship,
that's bizarre.
and it right? And because a lot of the misinformation inures to this administration or is being put out by this administration, and so, yeah, so I was just telling that, let's see. All right. Anyways, all right, let's wait like just one more minute. And as I've told people, that, well, I'm just going to let you tell your story because there's no reason that why would I tell it when you can tell it so much better in just a minute or so.
Sounds good.
So, uh, I've been I've been monitoring the air quality, I have to say, and yesterday, I don't know if you're in Denver, and I'm not asking you if you are or not, but I just will note that Denver right now yesterday apparently had really poor air quality, so,
Mhm.
um all right, let's get started. Are you guys ready? Yeah, okay. So, it is just such an honor. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Judge Brea Burgie to our show. And so many people here, they just want to know what's going on with you. So please just say whatever you want to say.
Okay. Well, maybe I can start off by giving my background.
Mhm,
That's a good place to start. I went to the University of Denver. I graduated in 2007. I worked for a state court for a year and then went out into the nonprofit sector. So I was responsible for the asylum program of Arizona. So I did VAWA and U visa cases for domestic violence and sex assault victims, and then asylum for just pretty much anybody who needed asylum.
mhm,
Um, After that, I joined the government through the Attorney General Honors Program. So I was effectively the staff attorney. It's called an attorney advisor, but the staff attorney in the Phoenix and Tucson immigration courts. And then I did another Attorney General Honors Program application and joined the General Counsel's office at EOIR. So this is in Falls Church, Virginia, basically DC, where I managed large class action litigation on behalf of the agency, drafted regulations. We're in-house counsel. So if you think about Pepsi would have attorneys in-house to give them advice. That's basically what I was for the immigration court system for 8 years. I left in 2019 and went to the International Rescue Committee to stand up a legal program here in Denver. And 2 weeks after I quit, they came back and offered me an immigration judge job. So that was, great timing on their part. I had applied for the job a long time before that, but they, in their infinite wisdom, decided to wait. So I ended up being at the IRC for only about 5 months, but created the structure for their program and hired their initial staff, and then went on to be an immigration judge. So I um, was appointed. I mean, I think my official appointment was October of 2018. I started training in September, and so I'd been a judge. I was appointed by Trump the first time around, and was a judge, yeah, from October 2019 until June of 2026 when I was terminated. So I have been through, uh, you know, the Bush administration, Obama, Trump 1, Biden, and Trump 2. So I have a lot of, kind of institutional knowledge of how the immigration court system works, because I've, been in the middle of it for a very long time, and seen the way that things swing, back and forth between the administrations. And, the reason that I'm speaking out is because in terminating me, what they did was illegal, but also the what judges are being asked to do in the immigration courts is also illegal. And this is very different from anything we've ever seen before. There's always so the immigration courts fall under the Department of Justice, and so they answer to the Attorney General. So there's an inherent structural political influence problem so that the administrations can swing us back and forth. Um, Usually you see that in the type of cases that they ask us to prioritize. So, like, one, it'll be actually under almost all the administrations, it's been families with children, which I've always found to be really difficult. Even that Obama actually started that. But it's, they'll prioritize one group or the other, and it kind of depends on how their priorities are. Or they'll ask you to do more cases, than the last administration, something like that. But firing judges and handing down policy is what they call it, that tells you how to rule on cases, is something very, very different. So, the Trump administration came in January of 2025. The first thing they did was fire the 4 top people in my agency. So they fired the director, the acting director, the chief immigration judge, the head of our policy office, and I'm trying to think of the other person. Oh, our general counsel. So the person that I had worked under at the general counsel's office. They were just summarily dismissed. And these are what we call senior executive service positions. And so they have civil service protections. And actually, just last week, my attorney who's helping me challenge my termination just won a case for a FEMA official. I don't know if you all remember, but early on in the Trump administration, they got very upset about FEMA paying for hotel rooms for immigrants in New York. Um,
Mhm.
well, the CFO of FEMA at the time was fired because of that. So the district court just ordered her reinstated last week, and she's an
I
S. Go
I was just gonna say, so for people in the audience, that's actually the article that I sent out yesterday that I wrote
Oh,
up, so I'm very familiar with that case. Um,
fantastic! Yeah, so that's really exciting, actually, and it's good news for those who are in my position, because if an SCS person who's a rank above us, like, so there's the general, sort of merit system, and we call the GS government service, GS1 through GS15, and then SCS is above that. So if an SCS person has merit system protections, that means that the rest of us underneath the SCS would also have merit system protections. But from day one, we knew things were going to be very different. They appointed an acting director, Cersei Owens, who just started sending out memo after memo after they call them policy memos that just ripped apart what the previous administration had done, called a lot of it illegal, said a lot of the hirings that had been done under Biden were illegal, threatened to sanction and discipline judges if we showed bias against DHS. And so it was just, it's setting a tone very early on of like how this was going to work. And then, they started firing probationary judges. So all of the merit system protections kick in at 2 years. But for the first 2 years, you're a judge, you're probationary. And so you can be terminated more easily you have less rights to appeal that. And they just started summarily, dismissing whole classes of immigration judges that had come on under Biden. Um, and so, we saw that, but then we started seeing the non-probationary judges. So, they cleared out. uh, uh, There was 38 judges who have been non-probationary judges who have been fired to date. We're up to about 130 judges altogether, but 38 of them have been non-probationary. And it's very clear patterns. I mean, really high grant rates. I think I was going through this I'm working on an amicus for some of the litigation around these Article 2 firings. And it's like 30 out of the 38 had grant rates over 70% for asylum. Overwhelmingly, they came from either New York or San Francisco. They shut down the San Francisco court because they thought it was too liberal. And yeah, so it's been, just a real attack on all of that. And so the writing's on the wall for the rest of us. We've been told we're going to be disciplined over all of this, and we're watching people with high grant rates or coming from liberal jurisdictions get fired. And so they don't need to come out and say we're going to fire you if you do this. It's just, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen. So do you want me to talk about what actually happened with my termination then?
If you would.
Sure. Um, so I have to step back and give a little bit of background about bonds. Um,
Yeah.
there are two statutes that we grant bonds for detained immigrants under. One having to deal with people who are already in the country, and one having to do with people who are arriving at the border. You have a lot less rights when you arrive at the border. It's a Supreme Court precedence. Your constitutional rights don't really kick in until once you've been admitted into the country or you've entered the country. And then once you've entered the country, you have the same constitutional rights as anybody else. Doesn't matter what your immigration status is. But if you arrive at the border, you're considered to be what they call it, the statutory term is an arriving alien, and you have a lot less rights. So that's one version of it. And then the other version is, again, everybody else. And so in April of 2025, the Tacoma, Washington immigration judges had started a very novel interpretation of who an arriving alien or who was seeking admission under this type of law, and started finding that if you entered the country illegally, it didn't matter where you were picked up or how long you'd been here, that you fell under the statute that was talked about people who were just supposed to be at the border, and you were no longer eligible for bond.
Okay, wait, just so I'm clear, and also bond basically is that can lay people think of that as what they know as bail, but it's just the different system. So what you're saying is the certain judges were saying, even though you're actually in the country because we were able to pick you up inside our
Mhm.
country, we're going to treat you as if you had just arrived at the border. Is that
As if you were still standing at the border effectively. Yeah.
okay?
So the Board of Immigration Appeals in an unpublished decision. So it's Immigration Court is the court level. Board of Immigration Appeals is our appellate board within the agency, and then you would go up to district, federal court after that. But so the Board of Immigration Appeals issued an unpublished decision, meaning it wasn't binding on anybody. It was just a decision that applied in that one case, agreeing with the Seattle judges. And so I don't know if the supervising judges were told to do this or if it was my supervising judge's choice, but he circulated that decision to all of the immigration judges. Just
Even though it wasn't binding on them. It was just
mm,
sort of like an FYI.
kind of. He didn't really say anything about why he was doing it. He just was like, "You should know this is happening." But it was like, then some ICE attorneys who are the prosecutors started making the argument. Some of the judges actually went back and looked at it who were in Aurora Detention Center here in Colorado. They changed their policy based on that too and started denying bonds for people. But it wasn't until July of 2025 that ICE released a memo saying that this was their official position, that people, if you entered without inspection or entered illegally, that you were no longer eligible for bond. And so then all of the ICE attorneys started making that argument just as a matter of policy in court. I this overturned or this is a reinterpretation of bond law that we have been operating under for 30 years. The Board of Immigration Appeals, the federal courts, everyone has agreed that if you're in the country, no matter what your status is, you are eligible for bond. And so this was, taking away, and this is the vast majority of people who are going to be in immigration proceedings as well. Um, so they start making this argument in July. I was hearing bonds, I considered it, and I was like, no, I'm not. Like, I'm not overturning 30 years with bond law. So no, I have jurisdiction. I'm going to go forward on these people's bond hearings. And then September of 2025, the Board of Immigration Appeals came out with a decision agreeing with ICE's new position and stating that anyone who had entered illegally did not have the right to a bond, finding that, they were, the same thing as if they were arriving at the border. So at that point, immigration judges are bound by what the Board of Immigration Appeals says. This is, it's the hierarchy of how courts work. And so at that point, our hands, this was our directive. This is what we had to do.
can I just, every so often, there's like a ripply sound coming from your end. It
You know what it is? I think it's, I think my computer's vibrating on the table a little bit. I
oh,
heard it. It raised
okay, I'm
it's just
sorry
this
to have interrupted you, but,
No, thank you for letting me know.
so
Um,
okay, so just also to be clear, so up until that Immigration Court of Appeals decision, it was not law or anything else. It wasn't even a policy or not a promulgated policy. It was just this one opinion that wasn't even published, but then
mhm.
it was being disseminated as like, "Hey, just for your information," but then it became did it have once that decision from the appeals court came down, did it have the force of law?
Once the Board of Immigration Appeals came down,
Yeah,
yes, so that
yeah.
was the force of law, that was binding on me, and so at that point, I had to find that I didn't have jurisdiction. I had disagreed with the board on the law, and in fact, in my decisions, I would say I disagree with it, and this is, why, but I'm bound, and so I'm gonna find I don't have jurisdiction. Well, there was this policy, obviously, because it changed things so dramatically, it was being challenged in, every federal court you can imagine after that. Um, we actually still have litigation that was ongoing here in Colorado, class action, but no decisions had been made. But there was a case out of the Central District of California that in December, I think it was like December 17th or 18th, the judge certified a nationwide class, meaning this applies to everybody in this group, and found that she entered what we call a declaratory judgment, which is a statement of the law and what people's rights are. And she said that people had a statutory right to a bond hearing under the normal bond procedure that we had been, or the normal bond statute that we had been operating under. And at that point, I was like, okay, well, the federal judges told me they have a statutory right to a bond hearing. I'm going to start hearing, not necessarily great. This isn't even about granting bonds. It's just giving the person the right to a hearing. That's what this entire fight was about. So, fast forward, a few weeks, we got one kind of wishy-washy email from headquarters, like, "We don't think this is right, like, we don't think you should follow it because it's declaratory judgment, and so it's not," what they said, coercive, meaning the judge hadn't ordered us to do or not do something, so for some reason, because she just said, "This is what the rights are," said, "This is what the law is, we shouldn't follow
Oh my
it."
god.
That was their argument, and then and I can tell you the day because I have all the emails. January 22nd, we got an email from the chief immigration judge with the last brief from that Central California case, the government's brief that they had filed. It was actually filed in response to the judge holding a hearing based on our noncompliance with her order. And so they were responding to her getting really upset about us not complying with her order. But they attached the brief and the email said, you need to review this and you need to confirm with your supervisor that you've read it. So I read it. It didn't contain any arguments that I hadn't already considered. And so, I walked into a bond hearing that morning and said,
A
uh,
bond hearing that was in your court?
mhm. Yeah, it was in Aurora. I was hearing this virtually from
Okay, yeah.
here. Yeah. Walked into a bond hearing that morning and just said on the record, like, "Hey, I'm going to put this on the record. We received this email from the chief judge. I've reviewed what they've told me to do, and it doesn't change my opinion. And so I'm going to go ahead and find I have jurisdiction." After I had listened to arguments from both parties, and then I ended up actually resetting the case for procedural reasons. So I didn't even make a decision on bond that day. That was Thursday. Saturday, I get 2 emails from my supervisor. The first one said that I was being counseled, which is um, it's a federal, employee term for being, disciplined, for my refusal to follow the board case that said that, these people didn't have a right to a bond hearing. And then 2 hours later, I got another email saying that I was being removed from all detained cases. And then from that moment on, I wasn't allowed to touch a single thing on detention. I wasn't allowed to even issue decisions that, we judges usually give oral decisions from the bench, and there was
Mhm.
some, but sometimes it's too complicated, so you reserve it and issue a written decision. So I had a few of those pending. I wasn't allowed to issue decisions in those cases. Those were reassigned to other judges. I know that my supervisor went back and changed my bond decisions that I had already made, even for people who
Ah,
had already been bonded out, I believe. I mean, I know. And then, so on Tuesday, they issued, or she sent out an email then to all of the judges saying that it was a problem that no one was following DOJ policy, which DOJ policy was that we had to follow the board case and not this district court order, and that if the judges continued to not follow DOJ policy, we would be disciplined. And then on a call later that day, she said discipline meant up to termination, and then told everybody that they should go back and change their bond decisions. And many of the judges ended up doing that. Even again
did
for
does that mean that people who had been bonded out were rounded back up and brought back to detention?
I mean, I don't know, we're not really privy to what happens once we issue the order, so I don't know what ICE did with the orders, but I do know that the judges reversed their grants of bonds and found that they had no jurisdiction. So, it's entirely possible that people would have been, put back into detention based on that.
Mm.
Legally, ICE could have redetained them. I think, it's interesting because the week that I got into trouble over this when I was disciplined, you know, eh, 2 of my colleagues in the same court actually issued decisions granting bonds in the same circumstances, and I didn't even make a decision. I just stated on the record that I was going to find jurisdiction and then continued the case. And I think the reason that that happened was because also in December, I had granted, bond in a really high-profile case for, an immigration advocate out of Denver named Jeanette Viscara. And after that hearing, ICE apparently, I didn't know this until all the news stories last week. Apparently, ICE came out and called me an activist judge after I granted her bond.
Oh, no.
Right. But the interesting thing about that was that that wasn't even under what I'm talking about. She had actually gone to federal court and gotten a habeas order, which is the essentially the district court telling us we had to hold a bond hearing, and they had put the burden on the government to prove that she wasn't a flight risk or a danger to the community. And I found that they didn't meet their burden, that that it was their job to prove that, and they didn't do it. And so I found that it was appropriate to give her a bond. So I think that probably what happened is I was already on the radar from headquarters, for doing that decision. And then so when I, made the statement that I was going to continue giving bonds, then that was their excuse to take me off of detained cases so that I wouldn't continue doing that. Um, you know, we so that was January. I mean, so then I was the only non-detained judge for 3 or 4 months in Denver. Everybody else was hearing solely detained cases because Denver also became responsible for, detention centers. Well, they're basically county jails that are housing, immigrant detainees, in Oklahoma and Nebraska. And so between us having to cover Aurora and then those other detention centers, it was more than full time for all of my colleagues.
And
And,
what were you doing during that time, when you were no longer even dealing with detainees at all? Were you still working in some capacity or
yeah, so I've always been a non-detained judge. So we have Aurora, the detention center where there's 3 immigration judges, and then we have the non-detained court, which, usually has 7 or 8 judges. And so I've always been a non-detained judge. So I just went back to doing what I had been doing. But at that point, I just got like slammed with cases because I was the only one hearing non-detained. Um,
and are those the hearings where people have heard we're not hearing it so much, but I'm sure it's still happening, but in the beginning, especially, we were hearing where people will show up for their check-ins or show up for their appointed times because 'cause they're not detained, and they get arrested by ICE.
So when you talk about a check-in, that's usually with their deportation officer at ICE. So if they're going for a check-in, they're getting picked up there. But we did have the summer of 2025, like May and June, I think. Uh, ICE ICE was doing. They had a policy to ask that we dismiss cases so that they could put people in a different. I don't want to get too much in the weeds because this is really complicated, but put them in a different procedure that would have made it much easier to remove them much faster. So they
Uh-huh.
were asking the judges to dismiss their case, and then as soon as the judge dismissed, then ICE would be waiting outside the courtroom and would arrest them. and take them into detention, and then they would be put in this, like, very truncated, procedure that they wouldn't be able to go before an immigration judge, wouldn't, the only relief they would have was potentially asylum, but that would then go to an asylum officer, and if the asylum officer didn't think that they had, the basic elements of a claim, then they would, sort of dismiss it, and then the person could be it's called expedited removal. They could just be removed out of the country.
And then, of course, that was also a litmus test for the judges, right? Because if the judges didn't dismiss the case upon ICE's request, then that meant you were an activist judge.
Well, that's true. I mean, there were several of us that were not doing it at that point. I did not grant any motions to dismiss. It's interesting because it was very confusing for the respondents because usually dismissing your case would be a good thing. It would mean you're not in removal proceedings anymore and you're not at risk of being deported. But this was, kind of turning it up on its head. And usually expedited removal is only used at the border. Like they kind of make a choice. You're either going to be put into expedited removal or you're going to be put into immigration court proceedings. And once you're in immigration court proceedings, then you get to follow that process. So this was a new thing that they had never done before in dismissing and then putting them into this other process. So
Okay, sorry to have interrupted. So you're still working,
yeah.
but no longer with detains. And then,
Mhm. So, I think I was also doing some other things that they didn't like. I don't know if you've heard about the ACA motions, these asylum cooperation agreement. They want people to go to third countries to apply for asylum rather
yes.
than applying here in the United States. We were told over and over and over again we did not have to hold an evidentiary hearing on those cases, that we should just grant them based on the paper. And I
Mhm.
refused to do that for pro se or non-represented people. And so I know that was causing issues, and that they were overscheduling my docket because of that. And then I was getting, like, written up for not timely completing my cases because, I mean, really the only way that you can complete the number of cases that they're giving you is to take shortcuts and remove people. There's 1,000 different ways you can remove somebody, and there's only usually one path to them staying. And so, they were giving judges all these tools to be able to, shortcut asylum applications and either, remove them to these third countries or just deny their asylum applications outright. And so, I declined to follow that guidance because I don't think how can you remove somebody to a third country without giving them the opportunity to come in and tell you why it would be dangerous for them to go?
Right.
Uh,
And of course, you had the background of that you had been working within the immigration system on the domestic violence and, violence application process, I think
right.
is what you were working on. So you really had a background to know that,
Mhm.
hey, these people that are coming here, they're not just doing it for, to have a nice vacation. They're doing it because where they live, where they're coming from, they are genuinely often in danger.
Yeah. I think that's true. Our asylum laws, it's interesting because just as about, sort of a little bit of history and background on our asylum laws, the first refugee treaty, which is what our asylum laws are based on, came out in the 1950s as a result of World War II. And so the category, it's not just enough that you be in danger of persecution. You have to be in danger of persecution because of a protected ground. And those are race, religion, political opinion, nationality, or membership in a particular social group. And so what those effectively are the populations of people that were persecuted by the Nazis. And so if you were persecuted by the Nazis, like if you're in that same kind of category of people, then that's, kind of a straightforward asylum case, but that doesn't fit the cases that we're seeing today. We see a lot of cartel cases and gang cases and domestic violence cases. And, that's the bulk, I think, of the cases we see. And the case the law that we've developed based on those international treaties doesn't fit the kinds of dangers that people are fleeing from now. Um, I forgot where I was going with this, but
Well,
I
you were still seeing in, the non-detains, and they were swamping you and then disciplining you because you weren't timely going through all these
getting my
cases they were swamping you with.
exactly. And, there was a lot of selective enforcement of things, where, like, my colleagues, they would just say something to them, but I would get written up about it or, I think they were building a case, to show that, I wasn't doing my job, effectively, but, it's really easy when you give judges a job that's literally not humanly possible to do, it's very easy to show that they're not doing their job because you can't complete what they're asking you to do, and so then if you only go after the judges you don't like, and criticize them for not meeting their metrics or whatever.
Did that
Um,
make you at all reluctant, to sort of socialize and chit chat with your fellow judges just because you couldn't know, maybe that would get them in trouble, or conversely, maybe they would share something with ICE and get you in trouble?
it wasn't ICE, it's the immigration
Or
courts that
the
yeah, ICE is part of the Department of Homeland Security,
right,
EOIR that is part of the Department of Justice, so this was in my own agency. I mean, there's collusion, but it's happening at the more headquarters level than so it wasn't that they would share it with ICE, it was that ICE was reporting on everything we did in court up to their people, and then
right.
it would come to us and, come down to us. Um, I I think that different judges have different judicial philosophies. I mean, I think that all of us were under this kind of pressure, and I think that there was, an amount of like just emotional support we were trying to provide to each other, or at least most of us were, because I mean, I feel like all of us felt like we could get fired tomorrow. It wasn't just me. I mean, I think I was the first, in line, but it could have been any of us.
That's just such a stressful situation in which to do work which is, your entire reason for being almost is to help people in their own very stressful, dangerous situations. I just want to point out before it scrolls off the screen that Thomas says, "Thank you, Judge Berkey, for your courage, your professionalism, and your respect for the law." Bravo.
Thank you,
So,
Thomas. Appreciate that. Um, so in May, they brought on 3 new immigration judges in
of
Denver and
of
one
this year,
yeah,
May of
May.
2026. Okay.
They brought on 3 new judges who are remote, so they're working from, like, their houses in different states, which is interesting. They've never done that really before. They brought on 1 new one in Aurora and 3 new ones in Denver, and then I think as soon as they got them trained, I think that's when I got fired, and so you've probably everybody's seen in the press now that they waited to fire me until, I was on vacation, and
Yes.
it's I looking back now, I think that they organized it to do it that way because, there was a lot of just I was hearing that people were being told not to work on my docket anymore, that it was a waste of time, or, that there was, that I was gonna be not here, at some point, like, it didn't we didn't need to consider Judge Berkey for, like, when. And so I thought they were gonna fire me when I got back. I didn't think that they would be that low to fire me on vacation, but that's what happened.
Oh, there are no depths to which this administration will not sink, in my view, at least. So I kind of almost doesn't surprise. I could almost see someone saying, "Ha, let's screw up her vacation." Teresa says, "Please hang in there. We appreciate all of your hard work. Truly have the most amount of respect for you."
Thank you, Teresa, I appreciate that. So yeah, so they fired me June 18th while I was on vacation. The Again, the irony is I was literally taking my kids on a 250th anniversary of the United States, like, Revolutionary War tour of the East Coast.
Oh my gosh.
It's, like, probably the most patriotic thing you could do, right? And then they fired me during that.
Just can I put a pin in that for just a second? Because you spoke about the most patriotic thing you can do, and am I right in understanding that Ms. I c it's not Velasquez, it was something else, that the the Trump activist who was in detention for, I think, 9
I'm,
months that you bonded, Viscara, um, is it do I remember correctly that speaking of patriotic things, like, not only does she have US born kids here, but one of her daughters is in the army.
right.
I just like, she I
Yeah.
it just blows my mind. I mean, that Yeah, I'm sorry. So anyway, go ahead. You were on vacation.
Yeah, so, that was a hard day. Um, I gave myself 1 day to feel like crap about it. Even though something's coming, it's still difficult. I've never been fired from anything before.
Yeah, but you were
Um,
fired for all the right reasons on your side. I mean, I hope you can wear it as a badge of honor.
I was thinking about getting myself a medal that says I was fired by Trump.
Yes! Yes, you totally should.
But yeah, I mean, and then I just said I'm not thinking about this because we were on a 3-week vacation. Like we took 3 weeks to go up and down from DC to Boston. And so I was like, I'm not thinking about this. And I didn't. I waited until I came back and then at that point, you know, filed for unemployment and did all the things you do when you get fired. And I feel for my colleagues who are still there. I mean, I think there's several of them that are still trying to do the right thing. Um, and, are at risk also of being fired. And it is an awful feeling to have that level of scrutiny, to have that level of, just intense pressure on you. Everybody thinks they're going to do the right thing when they're confronted by this kind of like pressure, peer pressure almost. And, it's more than peer pressure because it's your job, but like it's incredibly difficult to swim upstream from these things. I mean, it is a constant effort every day. And I mean, I would have a thought 3, 4 times a day, like is this the thing that's going to get me fired? Is this the thing that's going to get me fired? Um, and then I would check my name on the website every morning on the Denver Immigration Court. I've been
Oh,
fired. They take you off the website, see if I'd been fired before I bothered to.
oh,
Uh,
no.
I saw a question at the beginning about whether I had thought about quitting if they hadn't fired me, and the answer is yes. I mean, obviously, we were all of us were miserable. Was definitely having, like, physical, manifestations of the stress, like, acid reflux to the point where I was throwing up and getting ocular migraines and, those sorts of things. So it was really, like, physically affecting me and, getting home and, like, not even being able to move after you're so tired. You just flop on the couch and, like, cannot do anything else.
And it wasn't just even you, right? I'm sure it took such a toll on your family. Like, I don't know how old your kids are, but to see
Yeah.
that happening to their mom, it had to
Mhm.
be, uh, it
But,
had to
I
affect
talk
you.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just gonna say it had to affect your whole family.
Yeah, I mean, but I was very open with my kids this entire time, from when I got disciplined on, because I think it's important for them to understand, and I've told them this, I don't know how many times, like, you don't just get to do the right thing when it's easy. You have to do it
Yeah.
just because it's right, and sometimes that has consequences, and, it might be really terrible consequences. I have almost 17 years with the government. I'd been an immigration judge for 7 of those. I lost my job over this. But again, I can look at myself in the mirror and I could look at myself in the mirror every morning as I went to work. And, in some ways, I mean, I think there's part of me that is like, I'm just not going to let them win, like
Mhm, mhm.
I'm not quitting. And then, I think I also felt a responsibility to stay in that chair because I was doing the right thing every day and I was still, you know, doing things that other judges maybe weren't willing to do. And so I felt the responsibility to stay in there. That being said, I mean, at some point, I think my health would have gotten bad enough that I would have had to leave. But I wasn't at that point yet. And by making them fire me, I had recourse as well. I couldn't if I had quit, I couldn't challenge my termination and things like that. So I'm glad that I stayed until they fired me. But it is just egregious that this is what's happening in the immigration courts.
And especially because, the law, like you said, 30 years of law. And, I often rail against this administration that basically tries to rule by fiat, right? You can't,
Mhm.
they policies aren't law.
Yeah,
Policies are
exactly.
just that. And quickly before it scrolls off the screen, I just want Fat News Daily says, seriously, Judge, thank you for your courageous service. It's folks like you who make a meaningful difference in history.
Thank you.
And Chris says, "Mom is a hero." And Nancy says, "The nation of wicked smart women are standing with you."
I love that. Thank you. Um, I will say I'm glad to be out of that environment for the moment. I do feel guilty that I'm not there, like, holding down, that seed, but, I didn't choose to leave,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I had no control over it. And I think I can do a lot of good from the outside. And that's what I'm trying to start setting up. I've already committed. We have a nonprofit here called the Colorado Asylum Center that does intakes and helps people fill out asylum applications for people who are not represented. I had worked with them before I became a judge, and I have already committed to every Friday going in and doing their clinics with them, and helping them in other ways. And then going back to the IRC and also helping them with training and mentoring their attorneys. And so obviously I need to find something that I can pay my mortgage with, but I feel like those are some really concrete things that I can do to really make a difference right now, from outside. So,
And especially because you've been on the inside, so you
mhm,
really know more than most, exactly what's what. Um,
mhm.
so Susan asks whether ICE can collaborate with judges.
Not directly. I mean, there's still, like, what we call ex parte communication where ICE can't, talk one party can't talk to a judge without the other party being there. Um, it There is definitely collaboration happening, though, at the higher levels. You have ICE is within the Department of Homeland Security, and, the courts are within the Department of Justice, but you have the secretary and the attorney general who are able to collaborate, and they're both answering to the president. And then, like I said, I'm pretty sure that, I would hear from my boss that, like, I said this and it went up to their headquarters, and then it would come across to our headquarters and then come down to him, and he'd be like, "I was told to talk to you about this." So, it's not a direct, like, I didn't have an ICE attorney walk in and say, like, "Judge Burgie, you gotta do this," or whatever, but there was definitely a level of communication and collaboration was happening at the headquarters level.
And it was filtering down to you.
Mhm. Yeah.
Sue says, "You have nothing to feel guilty about. It's unfortunate for the country that you were fired, but we're very proud of you for standing up when so many were not." And that is, that's something that I think people on the outside struggle with every day is, the people who aren't standing up, and it's not a good look, but I mean, we also don't know. I mean, uh, you well, you didn't have a choice, and you stood up for as long as you could. It also, people who look like they're not standing up may have their own reasons that have nothing to do with, they may be under unbearable pressure, but may have, a sick loved one at home or what have you. But there
Yeah.
are also those people who not only aren't standing up against this, but seem to be cheering it. So,
There are
um,
certainly some true believers within both ICE and the immigration court system. That's absolutely, and you also have people that just go along with whatever the current
right,
dictates are. So if this is the current dictates, that's what they're gonna do. Yeah, I mean, it is disappointing. I mean, you can see how things like the Holocaust happen, right? Because this people just go along with what, and it's the frog in the boiling pot. You drop them in it,
right,
they jump out if it's boiling, but if you turn the water up,
gradually,
they're
right.
mhm.
And also, I think that some things are just so unbelievable that people just don't believe them,
Yeah,
even
or it's
though
just such a opaque system, like, people don't understand the immigration court system or understand, like,
yes,
why should we care about this? And that was in a lot of my let me start that again. In a lot of my other, interviews that I did with the media, I was trying to make the point that this is, I mean, you should care about this because we should care about everybody, right? We should care about due process. We should care that immigrants are getting their rights, and, I care very deeply about that. But even if you don't, this is about an attack on the rule of law. And so while
yes,
it's attacking the immigration courts right now, it's going to be Social Security next or the IRS, or, there's so many different systems that can be affected by this. And even the Article 3 courts, the actual federal judiciary, he can't tell them what to do, like, a policy, but he's attacking them in the media. And, we just had two Supreme Court justices at Congress asking for more money for security because, they had, they were getting so many threats and harassment. And that's so you can do, pressure from even if you're not, in a direct line of command, there's still a lot of pressure you can put on judges.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. So just some more comments from the audience. We're so proud of you. Thank you so much, says Chris. Carter says, thank you very much, Judge. You are an amazing, powerful role model. And Debbie says, leading by example. You know you can sleep well at night for doing the right thing. So
Thank
you have a whole lot of support out here and out there. And people have asked, and I don't know if you can talk about it regardless of what the answer is, but I think you already alluded to it that, are you taking steps to uh, confront the administration over your wrongful termination, essentially?
Yeah, I filed an appeal. There is current litigation over, 2 judges who were fired. The so it's called the Merit System Protection Board that you appeal this to. The again, rewriting 50 years of law, the Merit System Protection Board came out and, said that these judges did not have merit system protections. It's this new executive they call it the unified executive theory. It's that the president
Right.
controls the entire executive and can do whatever he wants effectively. But there was, the the Office of Legal Counsel. They're a really like, high-level, advisory office within the Department of Justice. They're the same office that came out with the memo that said that enhanced interrogation was okay back in the 2000s. They came out with an opinion saying that, yes, executive theory, he can fire whoever he wants. And there's a New York Times article that came out that said that the White House reached directly into the board members on the MSPB and said, "You will follow this OLC memo." And so that's effectively what they did. They found that they didn't have jurisdiction, and what that means is that we're not under the merit system protections. So that was
Isn't that what the Comans case was about?
Coleman Coleman's?
Mary Comans, the CFO of FEMA, the
Yes.
decision that just came out.
Yeah, so
Um,
this is within the administrative agencies, right? So,
where's it
yeah,
going? Yeah.
right, so then you go up to district court, and so their case is actually being appealed to, the DC Circuit Court, which is the appellate level, and, they, so normally when you appeal to a district or I'm sorry, a circuit court, it gets assigned randomly to a three-judge panel. They petitioned to have it heard en banc, which means the entire DC Circuit Court hears it all together, all of the judges, and it's almost never granted when people I mean, it's,
Right.
like, basically unheard of. They agreed to take this en banc, which is, I think, a huge signal, and the only time that they have done that in recent memory is for when they struck down the tariffs. And so I think we all thought, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing," they're gonna come out and say, like, "Trump administration is off its rocker." Um, the Supreme Court then came out with a slaughter case a few weeks ago, which, allows Trump to fire independent agency heads at will, even though Congress put for cause, provisions in the law saying, you had to fire them for cause, and the Supreme Court effectively came out and said that that violates the separation of powers, that they can't tell him how to do that. And so now it's really up in the air about who is at will and who Congress can put for cause, clauses under. Immigration judges have never been treated as for cause employees. We've always been treated as if we had merit system protections, and there's a lot of procedure that has to go into how they fire you. Um, so it's kind of up in the air.
Well, so in the Coleman's decision that just came out 2 days ago basically says, slaughter does not affect rank and file, civil service employees. It is only agency heads. So hopefully that will also I mean, I'm sure they're appealing it because that was the district court. So I'm
Right.
sure they're gonna appeal it, as you said, but, yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful.
I am too. I think the problem is there's a lot of dicta in that case that talks about just federal employees generally,
Mhm, mhm.
and we just don't know what the how far down the Supreme Court is gonna apply this new reasoning of the separation of powers and the for cause, violating that. Um, yeah, I think so it's an open question about whether, what's gonna happen, and I think we're still very hopeful that the DC Circuit Court is going to come out in favor of these two immigration judges. But what the MSPB is doing right now is dismissing everybody's appeals to them while they wait for the outcome of these two immigration judges who are fired. And so I filed for it, and then they said they were going to dismiss it, and so that's basically where it stands. So we're kind of just in a holding limbo pattern until the federal courts figure out who this covers. And the problem with immigration judges aren't sometimes considered to be rank and file federal employees because, so we had our union decertified a few years ago under the rationale that we set policy and we're these kind of like high level. We're high level when they don't want us to have a union. We're low level when they want to discipline us or fire us. So they talk out of both sides of their mouth. But so I think there's probably going to be some fighting about like where in this hierarchy do immigration judges fall. I'm on the executive board so our union was decertified, but we still exist. We just don't have collective bargaining rights anymore. And I'm on the executive board for the union. And so we're writing an amicus for this case that's at the DC Circuit Court. And our other argument is that this violates Toomey v. Arizona, which is a case where judges in Arizona were paid $12 for every conviction that they gave. This is 150 years ago or something like that.
Still. Oh my
Yeah.
god.
Yeah. And so the Supreme Court came out and said, you can't do that. You can't, pay judges for the outcome of their cases. And,
Unless it's the Supreme Court judges, and then and on the down low. No, I'm
yeah.
just
Well,
kidding.
I was going to say, I'm not going to comment on that, but
Yeah, no, I'm being facetious,
yeah.
but
But that's the other argument is that if you tie a judge's employment to the way that they rule, then it violates the same principle under Toomey that you can't pay judges based on their rulings, that they have to have independent judgment. And it's in the law. We're supposed to exercise independent judgment, and no one in the hierarchy within EOIR, the immigration court system, none of the supervisory hierarchy is supposed to be able to dictate the way that you rule in a case.
so if under TUI you can't pay judges, based on how they rule, wouldn't the converse also be true that you can't disincentivize judges for how they rule?
I mean, yeah, I think it's pretty clear. Like you shouldn't tie employment or, you know, anything to like you wouldn't be able to also tie like say if you give judges bonuses, you wouldn't be able to do that based on the way that they rule. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the Supreme Court has said don't do that. But again, the Supreme Court is coming in and just overturning precedents. So that Slaughter case, they had decided a case on the same exact fact pattern back in the 1930s where President Roosevelt had come in and fired an FTC commissioner. And they said, no, 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 you can't do that because Congress put for cause clauses in the termination. And then you fast forward 90 years, same thing. He fires an FTC commissioner. And they said, oh, no, 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 that violates. We're going to overturn the 1930s case and say that you can fire whoever you want.
Except if it's a Fed chair.
Well, that's yes. They said the banks, founding fathers meant for the banks to be outside of all of this, but everything else is under the executive. So
And
yes.
you're like and in that case, every single lawyer and law student had the scepter of Marbury versus Madison over their head from years ago in law school, right? I mean, didn't it? Um, well, okay, so actually we are about 8 minutes out from the top of the hour,
That's going quick.
and it really has. So first I want to, just ask you if there's anything in particular, make sure that you get to say whatever it is that you want us to hear. But also, I would like to ask you, part of the whole gestalt, if you will, of this administration is keeping everybody scared and stressed and feeling very helpless and powerless, which
Mhm.
I think you and I both know isn't entirely true. And so, what would you have people do with respect to what you see going on right now? Do you have any advice or suggestions for people so that they can feel more empowered or less disempowered? Because what I always tell my people is that the administration and certain far fringe groups, you know, They want you scared. They want you stressed. They want you confused because a scared, confused populace is a powerless populace, right? And so to take our power back, we the people, I refer to that as the fourth branch. We are the fourth branch, basically.
Mhm.
What would you, if anything, do you have any suggestions for what would you ask this audience to go forth and do?
I mean, I would reframe that entire thing. I mean, I
Okay.
spent the last 6 months scared and overwhelmed and, obviously physically kind of falling apart, and I still did everything in my power, you know. It's funny because I was doing the same thing I had been doing 2 years ago, which was my job and the law, and then I just continued to do that, and that's what got me into trouble with this administration. Um, I was a judge, so I had power in, this arena of our society, but everyone has power to do stuff, and so don't take it as being powerless. You have,
Yes.
power to push back or to, again, just continue to do the right thing, the same thing you would have been doing before this administration. Just don't, again, reframe it in your head because I always used to, well, there's 2 things that I used to think. I had a little sticker in my, desk that said, "Do the right thing even when no one's looking," and I crossed it out and put "everyone," because for me, that was a thing,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Oh,
Because, yeah, everyone was scrutinizing everything I did, and so it was like, you gotta keep doing the right thing even when everyone's judging you. Um, but the other thing that I kept thinking was, that saying, like, "Speak your mind even when your voice shakes." So even if you're sick, even
mm.
if you're intimidated, even if you're having acid reflux and throwing up, do you still have to do the right thing. You still have to show up every day and do the right thing, and that's not, to me, that's not negotiable. Um, so I think, that's everyone can do that. Specifically to this situation, what I would ask people to do, we are really excited. We have the union and the American Bar Association and the Federal Bar Association and all of these different groups have been pushing for, I don't know, at least a decade to create an independent immigration court system. It's an Article 1, so it would fall under Congress and it would be completely independent of the executive branch. Um, there was a bill introduced in the House a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and it was just, introduced in the Senate today by Senator Gillibrand. So, I would ask everyone to, if you can, write your senator, like, really do some advocacy around this because, I mean, the problem is, again, immigration judges are under the authority of the executive, under the attorney general who answers to the president. And so, we're constrained that way, but we also don't have like sanction power. You go into a real court, you go into, a state court or a federal court and you misstate the law or you do something unethical, they can sanction you. They can send you to jail. They can fine you. All I could do was yell at somebody. I could make them uncomfortable in court. So, why are you doing this? But I had literally had no, and so like ICE in particular regularly disregarded my orders. Just, we don't have to do it, and there's nothing you can do to us about it. And so if you made this an Article 1 court with sanction power, you know, it may not be politically feasible to, reorganize ICE or, do some sort of or abolish ICE or whatever, like to reform ICE. But what it might be possible to do is to create a judicial structure that oversees ICE that can hold them accountable for what they do. Because that's what, like, in criminal court, say, if the police violate someone's constitutional rights, the case can be dismissed. The evidence can be, disregarded, excluded from the trial. There's sanctions, and so there's a disincentive for the police to act badly. And I think you could have that same check on ICE if you gave the immigration courts the same authority that other courts have.
So get them out from under DOJ's thumb and have them be basically freestanding.
Yeah. So if everybody could get the word out about this, because again, this is like one of those technical things that like everybody's like, well, why would you do immigration courts one way or the other? But this is actually really, really important that the immigration courts become independent and can act, because I think, when you give judges the opportunity, they are going to do the right thing. It's just when your job's on the line, again, that was not the choice I made, and it's not the choice I would make if I went back, but that is what's happening, is a lot of judges are feeling pressure to follow what they're being told. And so if you take that pressure off, if you allow judges to be independent, that's what happened, in the federal judiciary. You're watching the federal judiciary push back on a lot of this stuff, and immigration judges would have the same authority to be able to do that.
So if people are going to do a search for those bills, what would be maybe the key search terms?
Yeah, that is a good question. Can I give that to you afterwards and maybe you can send it out? Because I don't remember. I don't know what the union's doing this, but I've been working on the litigation, not the bill,
Uh,
and so I don't know off the top of my head.
so M. Hope asks, is it the Fairness to Freedom Act?
I don't know. But
Okay,
I will look it up,
that's
or I'll
fine.
ask somebody in the union and I'll get that to you.
Okay, no, absolutely. And then Nancy asks, and usually this is my question, but she's asking it is, let me see how she worded it. Asks if you can come on again.
I mean, if it would be helpful, I'm not sure, this is what's happening in the courts as far as I can talk about it. But if, there's other things in immigration that I can come on and explain, I'd be happy to at some point.
Oh, yeah, I think we have a lot of questions about immigration generally that I mean, if you're willing to we could do a whole show on that. We recently had, Magdalena Kupris on, who is an immigration attorney in Florida, and she's been on a couple of times. The first was back when Alcatraz was, like, at its height, and
Mhm.
she had clients there, and so she came on to talk about that. But, yeah, people are still really I think they're incensed and outraged over what is happening with immigration, but also not really, fully aware of exactly they know just what's reported on the news, not what the
Mhm.
actual guidelines and policies and all
Mhm.
that are. Uh, so yeah, yeah. I mean, if you're willing to come back, we would love to have you back. You've just been so awesome. Anything else that you would like to convey before we close?
No, I think those are, I think, the important parts, and I appreciate you having me on and this discussion.
Well, thank you. So, oops, wait a minute. It just got pulled up. The bill to create an independent immigration court. Is that the one?
Probably.
It's in the House. It's being sponsored by Goldman. Is that right?
Thought it was.
Does that sound right? Or
Wait, no, it was. Oh gosh, I can't think of the name right now.
no? Here it says that he introduced the. I'm sure it's called different things by different people sponsoring it, but the Real Courts Rule of Law Act, which is legislation that would transition the nation's immigration court system into an independent judiciary.
Okay, that is
It,
that is what the bill is. So if that's what they're calling it, then that makes
okay,
sense.
so I'm just going to put those search terms in the chat, and that way, because I don't have any way of getting this, sending a message to this exact
Oh,
same audience,
okay.
once the show closes. So, guys, search for and then what they should do is contact their representatives and say, "Pass this legislation."
Yeah, because this is, again, the low hanging fruit for how, you can get the immigration judges to be able to follow the rule of law and hold ICE accountable.
And we're getting closer and closer to midterms, so, um, I mean, that would be really awesome
Yeah.
to have
I
that,
mean, obviously, we need comprehensive immigration reform and all of that, but, that's not going to happen before the midterms, I can tell you that much. It's interesting, my second summer in law school, I interned for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in, Washington, DC, and the very first day when I walked into my supervising attorney's office, she was on the phone with then Senator Kennedy's office, like, drafting the legislation for that bill, for the comprehensive immigration reform. The last time that we almost got this passed was,
Wow.
like, 2006, I think, so.
So it's been, happening I hope it's been attempting to have happened for decades, it sounds
Mhm.
like.
Yeah, I mean, the last major immigration reform that we had was '96, so it is way overdue.
Well, Judge Berge, thank you again so much for coming on and sharing your story with us. I really were honored and I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can keep in touch and then have you back at some point.
That sounds good. Thank you so much for letting me, share the story and for everyone's interest.
Absolutely. The force is strong within you, Judge Bergie.
I love that. I'm gonna put that on my tagline or something.
That can be on the flip side of your medal that says, "I was
There you
fired
go.
by Trump." Like, if, everyone send Judge Bergie T-shirts that say, "I was fired by Trump."
There you go.
All right. Well, bye, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon or evening or even morning, depending on where you are. And again, if you are not already a member of Notes from the Front, please consider joining us. Your $5 a month really does support the work we do here. And, then it also means that Judge Berge, you might find this interesting that when we write articles, when I write articles, they include the original source documents.
Oh,
And so that's one of the perks. And I think a lot of people have said they've learned an awful lot that they didn't know just by looking at those documents. So,
sure.
um, okay. Bye for now. Thank you.
Alright. Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.